IVM.
Welcome to the most listened to South Asian radio station on the planet. Ruckus Avenue Radio.
Hello, everybody. This is Amit Doshi from IVM Podcast, and we are India's premier podcasting network. We're so happy to be on Ruckus Avenue Radio and hope you join us every week at this time where we're going to bring you some of the segments from some of our best shows. We hope you tune in on the IVM Podcast app, website, or wherever you get your podcast from to listen to the entire episodes. So the last year's been tough for all of us, and the second wave of COVID really hit us badly. To help those affected by the pandemic in India, the podcasting community has come together under the Pod for Change banner to raise funds through an exclusive NGO partner, Give India. Join IVM and Pod for Change as we look to make a positive impact in the life of those affected by COVID-19. You can go to tinyurl.com/podforchangeindia, and remember, somebody could really use the help. It was Mother's Day last week, and guess who was on Cyrus? It was his mother, Olivia. And you can imagine how awesome the conversation was between the two. Tune in to hear all about how he was as a kid, how is he when not podcasting or hosting his show, his shenanigans, and a whole lot more.
Okay, this is a very special edition. We're recording at a very odd time because we missed the bus on Mother's Day. May 9th was Mother's Day, also my sister's birthday, coincidentally. So we've asked my lovely mother to come online. Just want to say for the record, she is asked to be paid. I said, Mom, please do this gratis. She said, no, I'm a professional and I expect some sort of payment. So Silvery, I'd expect you to answer that question because at the end of the day, I'm just a humble artist whose mother has been brought on the show. When it comes to the logistics of payment, etc., that falls in your lap as producer come creative guide.
Sure. So I feel that whatever, Cyrus, you make for this month of this podcast should go to Auntie.
Thank you. I would use the word bastard, but I never curse in front of my mother. So I'm never going to say that.
But you said it, and that's really
bad. I'm so sorry. I said it by mistake. I don't know how it came out. I'm sorry. Shouldn't. Firstly, man my age should not be asking for permission. I'm almost as old as you are now, Mummy. What are you talking about? Okay, before we set up, I have to just tell everybody my mother was not happy with this whole idea. Yeah. She doesn't like doing these kind of things. She's very worried about, I think, what I will say and how she may react and what people will say. Unlike me, she cares about what people say. Mom, why do you care? You shouldn't care so much. You care too much. And Silvery, whose real name is Antariksh, Mom, you can say anything. I know Antariksh should be tough for you, so stick to Silvery. He's a very nice guy and he's very good with parents and, authority figures and things like that. He's the opposite. Yeah.
Namaste, Auntie.
That means he'll touch your feet. I have to
touch your feet, yes. Sorry, but I'll touch your feet.
But he can't do that because of technology. It's just he's giving you a point. Mom, please say something. And is it possible to see more of your face? I think you'll have to move back a bit. Maybe I shouldn't give the directions. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, that's enough.
Okay.
Now relax. Okay. We'll discuss payment issues later. Right now, Silvery is going to actually ask more questions. I'm going to just try and correct you when you make mistakes. So every 10 to 15 seconds. Silvery, when you're ready.
So I have a series of questions just for ma'am. And I have a series of questions for both of you. Okay.
I also want to be called ma'am. So I feel comfortable.
Yes, Cyrus, ma'am. Will do.
Yes, thanks.
Okay. So I will start off with asking Olivia, ma'am. Ma'am, off the bat, obviously, it's probably going to be a cliche question, but our fans definitely want to know, what was Cyrus like as a child? Because we just imagine him to be extremely stubborn and mischievous all the time.
Mummy, tell him from the beginning, 10:34 in the night, August 7th, when I was born. How the doctor came and told you this is a great man and that kind of thing.
Oh, wow. Yeah, sure, Cyrus.
So what do you want to know? How he was as a kid?
Yeah. How was he as a kid? Because
at birth,
in our minds, he was just always extremely stubborn, extremely mischievous, and did not listen to you at all. Is that true?
They think I was a bad kid. Not bad, but like I don't know.
Yeah, he was a normal kid and he was very fond of dogs. So he used to take our little Figaro, who was, what was he?
Mommy, that was at the age of 6-7. He wants to know at 0. What was I like? How young was I when I first corrected you, for example? Or said something?
When you first?
When I said something back to you or dad?
I don't remember that young, but I do remember at 5 years you were in Cathedral, the small school here, Malabar Hill.
Yes.
And you did a show or a concert, what you call the Emperor's New Clothes.
Emperor's New Clothes. Yes, that was a school play. Correct.
Do you remember?
Yes.
And
I played the swindler.
The principal afterwards, I forget her name, and she said
Mrs. Banerjee.
She was never able to do the same concert again the way you did it. That's all I know when you were 5 years old.
They say that to all the kids' parents, to make you feel special.
Okay.
I say it to people who I work with, that you were the best. I told Silvery every day that fabulous the boss and all that.
Yeah, my ego auntie is at an all-time high. Now I know none of it is real.
He was must be acting from day one when he was born.
Oh, wow. Always? He was always into acting, is it?
Always acting.
Remember how I used to use your lipstick and wear your clothes and tell them all that now?
I don't remember all that.
I'm kidding, Silvery.
Auntie... Okay, Auntie did was Cyrus in a lot of school plays and all? Like you already said, he was in that Empress Clothes.
He always was part of the school plays and dramas and everything.
So that's a famous fairy tale, whatever, Emperor's New Clothes, where we play the swindlers, me and this kid called Rohan. And the swindlers, basically, they get caught in the end because they make the emperor wear nothing.
Yeah,
that's
correct.
I don't know if you remember the story.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
So we were most upset. Why we remember that is because following the story, the kid Vayu, I lost touch with all these boys, Vayu was supposed to be nude. And we were very angry that at the end he's wearing this bodysuit which is like yellow, as you can imagine. No? That's my memory of that. I was very angry, arguing. But he should be Nanda. Because that's what it says in the script.
Oh, okay.
From there, theatre has lied to us.
As a kid, you don't realize that you can't show kids naked on stage. It's not
listen,
cool.
We always imagine if you had read that when you were that young in the class collective, everyone starts laughing. It's like a great moment for the class. The emperor, this emperor thinks he's wearing something. The whole thing is they swindled him. Mom, sorry. This is your show, not about the emperor.
So actually, Cyrus, even I was in debates and all through my school life.
So bring your mom on.
Next time. Let's do it next time.
I know.
But yeah, that's quite. We have a few things in common. Okay, ma'am, one more thing. When did you realize? I know I'm going to be jumping back and forth through Cyrus's life quite a bit. When did you realize that Cyrus could speak really well and he could be a great orator in his life?
I think I used to correct my mother's conversation from time to time. I still do, but now she doesn't listen to me anymore.
You used to correct your mother's grammar?
At the age of 1, I was like a genius. I'd be like, Mom, there's a full stop after that sentence. And things like that.
What do you say?
Mommy, correct me if I'm wrong, please.
It sounds like, hello. It sounds like it's his day instead of Mother's Day.
Exactly, Auntie. That does.
Yeah. So why not carry on with him?
Note to self, don't hijack Mother's Day from your own mother. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
So, ma'am, when did you realize that Cyrus could talk really well and he could be a great orator?
My goodness. I don't know. At a very young age, because at a very young age, he wouldn't stop talking. I would tell him, I'll give you 10
Everyone
bucks.
stops talking. Sorry, go on.
I would tell him that I would give you 10 bucks if you stop talking.
10 bucks? 50 paisa. I remember clearly. I got a lot of that, Silvery. People used to tell me, I'll give you 1 rupee, I'll give you 50 paisa, shut up. That used to happen in my house and their friends. I know one guy, Darius, very sweet guy, babysat me once and he also said, how much money do you want not to talk? Yeah. So
it's like your first job. It's almost like a first job. Your first job is not talking.
Yeah.
And then you earn every time.
That's the only thing I can do, actually. How do I make any money? I'm quite useless otherwise. Yeah. Mommy, that was very mean of you killing my confidence like that, no? Saying 1 rupee to keep quiet. Do you feel bad?
Yeah.
And stop taking your phone in the middle. Whose phone is ringing?
No, sorry. There is AC repair work going on right next to me. And it was one of those guys' phones. 1 second.
Mommy, this is part of the whole show, huh? What happens live. That's what we really enjoy about it, huh?
All right, ma'am, next one. This is interesting. I don't know if you...
First, ma'am, then auntie. Why did you just call her Ollie?
What?
You're also an adult now.
Okay.
No.
I'll call her ma'am.
He can't call you Ollie.
Will do.
But why can't he call you Ollie?
Just stop it.
What's wrong with Ollie?
I told you, I'll give you 100 bucks to keep quiet just now.
But they're paying me more to talk. Then come on, Mom. I'm a businessman. You'll have to raise the ante.
What's the next thing?
Give me your best price, Mom. I'll keep quiet. Give me your best price.
Silverine, don't listen to him. Chalo.
All right. Next one, ma'am.
Yeah.
This is again.
Silverine, if she gets angry, you go back to your life. Once you press, shut the PC. But what happens to me? I have to face her. Huh?
Okay. Did you know any of...
Nothing. As if he's trying to say he's scared of me. Imagine
very
that.
Scared.
He scares us all here.
Very scared. Huh.
Sure. I can imagine. Okay, next one, ma'am. did you know any of Cyrus's girlfriends as a kid?
Oh,
Or
As a
did Cyrus
kid?
have
I mean,
any,
as a teenager, I don't
as a
think.
teenager, did Cyrus have any girlfriends and did you know them?
Do you remember the girls?
Yeah, one or two. I can't remember just now. 3 or 4, maybe. College.
1 or 2 or 3 or 4?
No, you should come home
No,
and
he
all.
had
We are a very
these,
liberal family, so she can't
okay,
complain
wow.
about
We
that.
had the girls in school and some in college come over to our house and all that. So it was not like girlfriend.
I used to call them for auditions
They would come.
for Emperor's New Clothes.
Wow.
Oh, Mummy,
Okay.
you please talk, others I'll keep talking in the background.
No, but you're talking in between when I don't even get a chance to
It
complete
all,
my
it's
sentence.
the upbringing. You should have stopped me talking with that 50 paisa long ago.
Really.
But now is the question is answers question. So do you remember any single
I
girl?
said that the girls used to come and we would all talk and have lunch together and all that. So it was nice when
I
we
was
had
very
these
very
girls
open,
coming.
and you're a very open mom, so there was no problem there. I don't remember any problem with girls.
No.
Yeah.
Okay. One more thing, ma'am.
Yes.
So this is a common thing that I'm sure Cyrus gets all the time. We get it in comments very often also. Do you ever have a problem following what Cyrus is saying because he speaks so fast?
All the time. Mummy, did he?
Do you what?
She didn't get you. Talk slowly, Silvery.
I know. Ma'am, do you ever find it difficult to follow what Cyrus is saying because he talks so fast?
Yes. I
Yeah.
do sometimes, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, her biggest
Fair
grouse
enough.
is Silvery.
Yeah.
Her biggest
Yeah.
grouse is ask her right now. I mean, she's listening to us. So
Yeah.
is that I talk and then I don't wait to see if she's listened. I mean, understood. Especially if I'm asking for something like, will
Yeah.
you buy a deodorant or something? I say it and move, and she's like, what? And then when I come back and say, where's the deodorant? She said, I told you I didn't hear what you said. That happens like 50% of the time. Yeah.
Okay. My mother tells me to talk slowly.
No,
but
in
nobody.
his case, hello, Silverine.
Let him,
Yes, ma'am.
let her
In
complain.
his case, he's talking and walking out of the door. So I don't know what he said.
Baba, it's all back to Emperor's New.
He should have that much respect or
Yeah.
manners
It's
to stand in and tell me what he's saying.
who's responsible?
And then after
But
he
who's
goes
responsible
out,
for that? Who?
he
That
expects
that
me
was
to
whose
have
job?
heard what he said.
The,
But he's out of the door.
But I'll tell you, Silvery, in my defense,
Yeah.
because of Emperor's New Clothes and all the theatre I did after that, I always, I take an exit.
Hmm.
I deliver my line and I take an exit.
Okay,
I mean,
done.
which is actors standing there on stage all day doing nothing. So I do my line, I make my point and I exit. And then there's little music in the background. So I don't know why mom is complaining.
And even now at this age, he treats me really like that only. He hasn't changed. I have slowed down now. I'm, if you know my age. So
49, yeah.
he doesn't stay there and say, oh, my mom couldn't have heard or, anything
But Mummy,
like
on the
that.
other
There's
hand,
nothing. It's
I'm training you to get your senses back in
Yes.
that acute position.
correct.
Because you're always on the ball with me because I'm fast.
At 79, you're training me.
Why not?
So
Are the human being is
I'm
capable
your
of
son or you're my
Silvery-
mother or I'm your mother.
Silvery has an AC repairman who's 91, who's just outside the frame. That guy can't even climb to the AC, but he's doing it because the mind is stronger than the body, and he will repair the
Yeah.
AC 15 minutes longer than a normal person, but he's doing it.
Correct.
So this is a
That's
gift.
why I do all your work, no?
What work, mummy? I don't do any work. What work will you do of mine?
What do you all right, yeah.
We are exposed to a family of liars. This is all going on.
Yeah. Starting with you. The biggest.
Okay, so the point is that I talk too fast, and you're very irritated about it. So let's plan what would be a right pace.
Yeah.
Yeah, you tell me the pace that you want me to talk at. Mother,
You
what are you
you
doing?
should think of the other person, not only of yourself, and whether you're talking to me or you're talking to
What if
somebody
it's
younger.
what if it's
According to that, you should know how to talk.
fair enough? But what if it's 7 people and each one is of a different age? Then how do I handle the situation?
Yeah, more or less, you should know.
What do you mean? Because one I have to talk fast, one I have to talk slow, one I have
Young or old or middle-aged or what.
so I have to run an average. You're saying? Or mom,
Yeah,
are you there or not?
I'm there. You can't see me.
Okay, so let's clarify this and finish it up. No, then people listening will be happy also. What is the pace you want me to talk at?
To who?
To you?
To me?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, what?
slowly.
Okay.
Okay.
let's talk slowly.
Silvery,
Yes.
this whole show is going to be a little longer.
Yeah.
And it's going to take a little while. Be patient.
Okay, sure.
Agla sawal.
All right. Agla sawal. Who is more patient? As Cyrus asked, who is more patient, you or Cyrus?
What a question. Olive.
It's a terrible question. Because I'm so patient.
That she is.
That I wish she had at least half of my genes.
No, that she is. I'll give her that. My mother is patient.
Okay, so has Cyrus always been impatient? Has always been an impatient child?
Always. Yeah, wow. Always.
Oh, do you agree, Cyrus?
Oh God, I have a time gene problem. I don't know how to stop. And the thing is, Silvery, you're talking about podcast on time or shooter on time or whatever, which is fine. It's work. I have a problem with drinking in parties also. I used to drive people mad because it's like 8 o'clock and nobody's come and, I just go berserk. And that's just fun. And the whole night of fun ahead of you. So 8 or 8:15 shouldn't matter to anybody else. And I've already lost my mind. My mother knows that. The drivers who come late, things like that, when there's nothing to do. So there's the fascist in me also. Mummy, where do I get that from? This madness for time. Because although you all are decent with time, none of you all are so crazy. Neither is my sister. How did I get like that? Who's responsible? Which uncle or aunt do I have to blame?
You can catch the entire episode on the IVM app, website, YouTube, and across all platforms. Remember, Cyrus Says goes live on YouTube every morning at 10 a.m. Indian Standard Time, so make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. It's time for a break, and we'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Zarina Poonawalla, host of the Empowering Series podcast on the IVM network. I happen to be a peak performance coach and leadership coach by profession, and I'm here to share with you productivity tools, life-altering techniques, and real-life hacks to help you achieve your maximum potential in everything you do, your relationships, professions, careers. So tune in every Monday to unleash your inner power. Be safe, be well, be empowered.
IVM.
Welcome back. The habit coach Ashton Doctor was in conversation with Sarah Jane Dias, actress and wellness warrior. They discuss what wellness actually means and highlight some unhealthy lifestyle choices that might be affecting wellness goals.
This whole journey has so many different stages to it, right?
Yeah.
Like there's the college part. And I know there's so many kids who are listening to this who go to college, and I get messages from them all the time. They're confused, especially like you said, it was the time when you're molded like clay.
Yeah.
Do you have any, thoughts about that? Like, what should they be thinking about right now when they're in college? What are the aspects that they need to be possibly thinking about, focusing on? Maybe from a wellness point of view, maybe from a growing up point of view.
I think that everybody wants to be a part of the cool kids, but the perception of what a cool kid is actually something that's fed to you. It's not something that comes intuitively to you. I was that kid. I used to be, when I was in school, the correct uniform wearing, oil in the hair wearing, A++ scoring girl. And then I came to Bombay and I had my TLC baggy pants on and my boys t-shirt on. And you remember those black rubber band bangles that used to be really cool at one point? I don't know if you remember these.
Yeah, of course.
They used to be very in, like stacks of those. Yeah, very, very goth meets hip hop.
Correct.
That was my vibe, right? And I swear to you, the looks I used to get in college was just like, okay, you do realize you're a girl, right? Like, you're just saying, And I changed. And you can see it in my pictures. I started wearing tight pants and crop tops. And to all the teenagers out there and to all the kids out there, you have to first realize, I think, just how blessed you are, because you live in a time where acceptance is a thing, where growing up just the way you want to is a real thing. There is no need to apologize for it. There is no need to pretend. You will find your quote-unquote cool circle just being who you are. And that's really what I wished someone had told me back then, because I just felt like it was an endeavor to be somebody else. It was never an endeavor to better my strengths or to get over my weaknesses. It was an endeavor to fit in. It was an endeavor to be somebody else. And I lost a huge sense of who I was. And that just continued into my career then. And it just continued into my relationship choices. It continued into my food choices. It continued into everything. So I would think that's what it is. It's hard. It's hard because, like it or not, there are certain kinds of people who get applauded more than others. But again, I will say, we still live in a time where there is acceptance of all shapes, all sizes, all colors, all talents. And you've got the right platform to do it and to really build your own unique story. And that's really what your focus should be, is really asking yourself that question until you get exhausted of answering it, is who am I? And that answer will change, mind you. It can change, every year. But really, who am I? And really owning that and really staying true to who that person is unapologetically.
Yeah.
Of course, I run the risk at this point of when I say unapologetically, don't be an asshole. Like, just don't. And you know what I mean? Some people take that owning to another level where it comes at the detriment of other people's betterment. Don't do that.
Correct.
Right? Don't be yourself at the cost of somebody else not being happy.
Yeah. And then don't blame it on I'm like that only.
Oh, I hate that.
Worse is when you blame it on your horoscope. Oh, I am a Scorpio. That's why I'm like this. Thappad. Right? Like
Thappad. And how? Like, I'm just like, firstly, I believe in the stars and alignment and, energies and karma. I'm a deep believer. But again, within that, it's unique. Everybody's birth chart is completely unique. So saying a statement like I'm a Scorpio, I'm just like that is such a redundant thing to say. Because when you were born, where the stars were, is completely different from any other Scorpio. So you really can't compare and be like, oh, Scorpios are like that. What am I supposed to like? Or when people, or worse is even when people judge you. Oh, you're Sagittarian, right? Sagittarians are just like that. I'm just like, yeah. Just never mind.
Sarah, you said something so important earlier, which I want to just touch upon. One is that you said that we are constantly looking for applause and we're trying to be part of, there are some people who get more applause than us and there's some gangs that get more applause than us.
Yeah.
And that's the thing,
Yeah.
We're constantly looking for that validation, and the validation flies in the face of knowing who you are.
Yes.
I remember even when I went to therapy, and I think in our second or third session with the therapist asked me, so Ashtin, who are you? And I was like, what a stupid question. And this is when I'm much older, right? I was in my 30s. And I was like, what a stupid question. Of course, I know who I am. What's up with that? No, you've been who your parents wanted you to be. Then you were who this person wanted you to be. Then you were who this person wanted you to be. Who are you? And I had a terrible ride home that day because I did not know how to answer that question, honestly. And then it was that pursuit of understanding who I am without the layers of what people expect from me. And that is what you're saying.
Absolutely.
Right? Who are you without the layers of what people expect from you?
Yeah.
And that is the freedom that you can then explore and completely thrive on.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
This is such an important point. Thank you for sharing this because there was a brilliant, brilliant answer to that question.
I wasn't even trying to, but thanks. I was literally just going, because I was thinking, I'm like, what would I have wanted someone to tell me, man? Like when I was like struggling and trying to be like, that's it. That's what I would have wanted someone to tell me. Is be like, dude, just be you.
Yeah.
Whatever version of you want to be. And it's easier said than done, right? Like when people say, be positive, I want to punch them because it's just like, you can't just be positive. It's a habit. It's a conscious effort. It's a journaling every day. It's believing in positive affirmations. It's doing your meditations. It's practicing some kind of physical activity. It's, taking care of your health. It's showing up for your friends and your family. It's all of that contributes to you being the best version of you.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And that hard work is something that I definitely want to touch upon. But there's this one aspect that I wanted to speak about before, which is you had success at a very young age. And the reason why I'm talking about this is because a lot of people message me saying that, Ashtin, I'm 24 and I haven't achieved anything in life. I'm like, what? Yeah, see, I'm nowhere close to what Elon Musk does. I'm like, arre, dhakkan. Like, who are you comparing? Why are you comparing? What are you comparing?
I mean, compare apples with apples here.
But like, even if you're not, why are you so hungry for success at such a young age? I want to just explore what was success at such a young age?
Yeah.
What did it feel like? What were the things that, are important for us to keep in mind? And maybe something around those lines that you can share with us.
So there are a couple of things, right? Because I may seem successful to the world, but it's only very recently. And I mean like maybe a year and a half now. I've been working for 20 years. It's only a year and a half now ago that I have finally not looked for the next successful thing to do after being successful. Finally, right? And that's taken a lot of work. But that again comes from just owning me and owning who I am and a gratitude practice. So it's a couple of things. When you look at somebody else's life and you want to be like them, first off, it's a mix of, let's say, jealousy and envy, right? But instead of looking at it as a negative emotion, if you could just turn that on its head for a second and maybe make a list of what it is that you admire in that person and what it is that you're jealous of, you'll realize that it's actually a reflection of the things you want in your life, right? Then take that and get specific with it. So, for example, Elon Musk is sending a rocket to space, is sending rockets to Mars. Do you want to send rockets to Mars? No, I'm pretty sure you don't. But you might want to do something in space travel. You might want to do something in tech. So then you get specific. Be like, okay, what in space travel do I want to do? Do I actually want to be on the rocket? Do I want to develop the rocket? Do I want to help technology be built such that so that everybody has access to being on a rocket? What is it that you want to do? And slowly, as you keep sort of asking these questions and filtering through what it is about this person that you want to be, you'll realize that it's actually in your power to make your version of an Elon Musk. Nobody can be Elon Musk because there's only one of him. And nobody can be you because there's only one of you, right? And everybody has a unique gift. And everybody has the absolute right to be apologetically owning of that gift. So I would just say that, and of course, one also needs to define what success means to you. So for me right now in my life, if I were to talk about being successful, to me being successful is being able to, like, okay, I'll give you an example. For the longest time, success to me meant being financially independent, right? So that to me was a success. And having gotten that at a young age, I'm happy to say that I have been financially independent. But that's changed today. Today, me being successful means being supportive of my family. And that can change from year to year, but it's important right now because my family's been through some pretty tough times over the past 2 years. My happiness is intrinsically linked to theirs. So if they're happy, I'm happy. For me, success looks like a place where my family feels supported, both financially and emotionally. And if I can do that for them, I'm successful.
For more health and wellness, tune into The Habit Coach on the IVM app, website, YouTube, and all other platforms where you might be listening to podcasts. Next is a treat for everyone, especially if you're from Mumbai. We have a place called Dadar. In most Indian languages, it means stairs. And it is said that the train station here is so huge and that it has so many stairs. But apart from that, it's an iconic neighborhood with crossroads and junctions. And it's an area which separates the so-called hustling Bombay from the more affluent South Bombay. Having said that, Uttam Mamoria's latest postcard comes from this address and it's an interesting one. Do listen in.
This week, I take you to Dadar, one of the most iconic areas of Mumbai, and uncover its connection with outer space. Uncle left our chawl under the pretext of his job with the railways. If we, in childlike innocence, said to father, Dada, let's leave this place for something more spacious. Maybe in Dadar, they say there are nice places there, and inexpensive too. The attempt proved futile. The very manner in which Dada pronounced Dadar implied his utter contempt for a place that was so remote, it might as well lie beyond Thane Creek. I'm not going to budge from here, he would say stolidly, and adding for good measure, go where you like when you grow up and get too smart for your boots and start making more money than is good for you. Go to your Dadar, or better still, go rot in Andheri. This excerpt from the story The Last Tram by M.V. Rajadhaksha might seem surreal today, given that the most expensive property which is up for sale in Dadar West is worth a whopping 16 crores. But these were the days Dadar wasn't a sought-after locality. Mumbai was the city of mills, and the workers resided in chawls at Girgaon. They arrived from villages where the community spirit was alive, so the openness of the chawl culture suited them well. As the city grew, congested chawls were replaced by more spacious blocks, and the migration began. Dadar soon became a center for trade. There were bullock carts and hand carts which transported grain and were often parked in Dadar. As the produce was offloaded, hundreds of pigeons would flap around to pick up the grain. As trucks replaced hand carts, many of these pigeons would get crushed to death. This saddened the Muni at the Jain Mandir. He consulted a nearby shopkeeper, Vallabhji Vora, to prevent this daily massacre. Vora managed to convince the municipal corporation to allow the center of the square to be fenced off with iron railings, making space for pigeons. Today, we know this as Kabutar Khana, which has been declared as a heritage space and forms an essential part of living and breathing Dadar. But Dadar's contribution went beyond the commercial. The lesser known aspects are Dadar's contribution to art and culture, and not just on Earth, but even in outer space. But before we rocket off into space, I'd like to take you to one of my favorite modes of travel, the humble train. While Dadar had a tram terminus and train station for decades, we really need to thank a politician and resident of Dadar, Madhu Dandavate, the Minister of Railways in the Morarji Desai government. A resident of Shivaji Park, he first introduced the computerization of railway reservations, an innovation which greatly reduced corruption. But his most important innovation came in the form of 2 inches of foam. He championed 2 inches of foam in the sleeper berths of second-class sections of trains. If you grew up traveling in trains in the 90s, you'd know the world of difference between hard wooden seats and soft cushioned ones. I find Dandavate's words full of concern for the common man. For he said, "What I want to do is not degrade the first class, but elevate the second class." If the railways became a way of national integration in the 70s and 80s, Dadar resident and music composer Vasant Desai richly contributed to it too. The then Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, once lamented that Indian school children were unable to sing our national anthem tunefully. At the request of the Education Minister, Vasant Desai ran workshops for teachers, recorded appropriate songs for children, and travelled all over the state to teach his program titled Ek Sur, Ek Taal. This was then adopted nationally. So the fact that through our schooling, we could all sing the national anthem in unison, we have Vasant Desai to thank. But my favorite personality from Dadar happens to be a singer. Not the late Pandit Jasraj, who incidentally came from the locality as well, but a dominating inheritor of the Jaipur Atrauli Gharana, Kesarbai Kerkar. There is a good chance you have never heard of her. Much like Madhu Dandavate and Vasant Desai, she was a perfectionist, and the famous Marathi humorist P.L. Deshpande could tell you that. In one of her private performances, she left the audience spellbound. Deshpande was the master of ceremonies, and she told him that she would now stop singing. Deshpande was aghast, but she said, "You may have not noticed, but my voice shook a couple of times." True to her word, she did not even sing a single note for the rest of her life. But her composition, Jaat Kahan Ho, can be listened to today not only by you, but even by aliens. Yes, I will say that again for you, by aliens. This song is included on the 12-inch gold-plated copper disc, Sounds of Earth, which has been traveling through outer space in the Voyager 1 since 2012. The song is about a mother singing to her daughter who has come of age and is going out. There is resignation to the inevitable, but also concern for her daughter's welfare. I think the loneliness of the mother would find resonance with the Voyager, orbiting away, alone in endless space. I spent 4 years of my life in Dadar, traveling to work every day. And it's a shame that I did not know most of what you heard today. But there is one more aspect of Dadar I want to leave you with. And it takes us back to where we started. Kabutar Khana. The Dadar Kabutar Khana Trust, which constructed roosts and bird baths for pigeons, sources funds from wholesalers in Dadar to maintain the Kabutar Khana. Vets from the Veterinary College in Parel make regular visits to Kabutar Khana, diluting multivitamins into the pigeons' drinking water to strengthen their immunity against disease. Our own neighborhoods need such nurturing. There are countless stories that are waiting to be unearthed. When I was writing this, I consciously chose not to talk of Shivaji Park, Sharda Ashram School, by the way, where Sachin and Vinod Kamli studied, or Dadar Chowpatty, because we cannot physically go there now. But maybe, if we could spend time talking to older folks in our communities, we might find stories that give us a new appreciation of our neighborhoods. Let those stories not feel the loneliness of a mother in Jaat Kahan Ho or the loneliness of a Voyager.
More postcards from places of the world on the IVM app, website, or wherever you get your podcasts from. It's time for a break and we'll be right back.
We live in an age of disruption, of immense change in every aspect of work, life, and business. But is the old way of doing things truly dead? And are we ever going to stop saying the new normal? Join me, Varun Dugirala, on Advertising is Dead every Tuesday as I talk to entrepreneurs, leaders, creators, and change makers from across business, media, marketing, and beyond to dig a little deeper into how we got here, what we're doing now, and where we're headed. You can catch all the episodes of Advertising is Dead on the IVM Podcast website, app, or wherever you get your podcast from.
Ruckus Avenue Radio.
Welcome back. If you've been reading the news, you know that India is not in a good place. The pandemic is at its peak, vaccines and resources are in short supply, and our government has been facing some serious flack. On the note with Maruk Inayat, we had Amitabh Mattu, an international relations expert, who discussed the foreign media's perspective and reporting on the Indian government and what it can do to rise in their eyes again.
Hello, welcome, and Khush Ahmadid. You're listening to The Note with me, Maruk Inayat. Headlines after headlines, publications after publications, the international media has been focusing on the acute humanitarian crisis emerging out of the second wave of COVID-19. And rightly so, asking questions about the lack of administrative action on the ground. International media has raised questions about the leadership of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Joining me on this episode of The Note is a man who understands India's muscular foreign policy, somebody who understands the gravity of the situation vis-a-vis the international press. One of India's leading intellectuals, Mr. Amitabh Mattu. So, let me start with this. Headlines screaming across the international media, from the cover of Times Magazine to literally a front page story in the Washington Post every day for nearly a fortnight. The Australian, from a country that you are very close to, Australia, screaming about the absolute chaos in India. What does it do to India's image abroad?
I think that it's terrible for India's image abroad. It dents India's carefully cultivated image. And you can't write off all these headlines as just part of a left liberal agenda. It's most conservative papers are also echoing what the left liberal papers are echoing. The Times London, it's part of the Murdoch media group, as well as the Australian, which is a sister paper of the Murdoch group. So it does reflect very poorly on India's image, and particularly because in the last 20, 30 years, in fact, since the beginning of the IT revolution, India's image as growing an emerging power, but particularly its soft power, whether it was Bollywood or IT or literature, or the general sense of well-being that India projected, that has taken a bashing, really. That's been battered. It'll take a lot. I mean, I'm not saying it's not redeemable. I think it will require a tremendous effort. And ultimately, as someone said, that your optics has to reflect a reality. So your reality on the ground has to change. Then you and I feel that sense of comfort again, because let's face it, you and I are also part of the civil society, part of the citizenship of this country, who feel deeply vulnerable at this point of time, given the pandemic.
Mr. Mattu, the External Affairs Minister, Mr. Jaishankar, reportedly held a meeting with all the foreign envoys and told them that you need to work on this one-sided world narrative that is growing against India and spoiling India's image. Now, many have said that should he have been focusing more on India's image rather than telling the envoys to actually work to get the best aid for India? What is your opinion on this?
You see, in some ways, it's a dilemma. He has a job to do. He has a job to do, which is to preserve and promote India's image. So he was trying to do that. I think it's not going to work, but I don't grudge him to try and get all the various ambassadors. They're individuals who are affected by the pandemic, but also presumably have their idiosyncrasies, eccentricities. So to get them to know what is the party line, that's what ministers do. This is the party line. You have to say this, don't react to the press, keep saying no one could have anticipated this pandemic, and then, of course, work towards getting as much assistance as possible. But clearly, I think the MEA has to work with the Ministry of Commerce, with the Ministry of Finance, with all the other various departments and ministries of the Government of India to ensure that the assistance is delivered and delivered on time. You can't have images of containers full of vaccines or other assistance like ventilators or concentrators not waiting in at the airport, at Indira Gandhi International Airport, waiting for customs clearance. That shouldn't happen, because that suggests that not only are you not fully grasping the urgency of the situation, but you're not even being able to deliver on the ground when it matters most.
I mean, there are several reports coming out, and even though the government and the Niti Aayog seems to have clarified, but they still haven't given clear-cut answers on where all this 40 lakh items of foreign aid is really going. Now, 25th of April is when this foreign aid supposedly came into India. And as late as May 3rd, the states were saying we were given no directive. The first written, directive of sorts that came from the center came on May 3rd. I mean, that's a criminal delay, given how people are gasping for breath. One is what India does internally. But how would internationally the community look at India when they are trying to send aid and being a true ally? How would they view this?
Three things, Maruk. One, Indian bureaucracy is naturally conservative. They're not risk takers. All bureaucracies behave institutionally that way because you want to pass on that risk. You don't want to be seen as the person who used your own discretion to give clearances when there were rules put in place. Secondly, the fact is that the bureaucracy is not firewalled or insulated from the rest of the country. Anecdotally, I'm told that the number of officers at the senior level within various ministries who are down with COVID is far greater than you and I would imagine. Thirdly, I think the fact that you need a much more decentralized system, and all of government approach based on empowering joint secretaries at the joint secretary level at the very least to take decisions is critical. At the moment, it seems to me that all our decision-making has become centralized. In fact, one of the sticking points between what the Americans and the Indians were negotiating was that the Americans wanted delivery of assistance to institutions and a much more decentralized manner in which that assistance would be delivered. But while the Indian side was insisting that it should be dealt with at an apex level, at the Prime Minister's office level, or at the various other centralized levels, I think that needs to go. You need to recognize that this pandemic is a national emergency. So that old style approach will not work. If you have to save lives, and if you have to save, let's face it, lives and livelihood. Because in the first wave, you were able to at least save lives, if not livelihood. Here, you're going to, in the second wave, you're losing lives, and that those lives are going to be reflected in the dismal state of your economy in the days to come.
But I also ask you, Mr. Mattu, what happens in terms of the understanding that all these countries who've been helping India out have of the Indian system? Would they ask for accountability later, having sent this aid? Is that the normal process that happens when you send humanitarian aid to a country?
Yeah, but a country like India, which is really a big country in which people are investing because of the promise of India, I don't think there'll be a kind of audit which will be demanded. Internally, I think we should have an audit of all assistance required. But India, fortunately, still is not an African banana republic where we'll have to provide a point-by-point audit of exactly how each product was used and delivered and who it was the beneficiary. Now, so at this moment, it's really humanitarian in the largest sense of the term. They're giving without asking. They're giving because they realize that India needs assistance. Remember, it takes a lot for an India which has built up this image of Atmanirbhar.
Economic heft, yes.
And also economic heft, and also had years of autarky where you was thought of aid as being linked to various strings in terms of the commitments on foreign policy that you would have to make to accept aid. It just tells you about the gravity of the situation that today, far from being seen as the net security provider, health provider, we've just become so vulnerable that we have to accept donations, aid, assistance, come what may.
We have had expert coverage on the COVID crisis and more on the Note with Mahrukh Inayat, available on the IVM Podcast app, website, or wherever you get your podcasts. The COVID crisis has invoked unity in the world to some extent, in the sense that everyone has been helping in whatever capacity they can to ease and fight this common enemy. On States of Anarchy, Hamsini Hariharan deep dives into how the geopolitical connections of the world have been affected by this pandemic. How do they shape the COVID response and world order? Listen in.
Today is our special Q&A episode where I answer listener questions. So let's dive straight into it. We have 2 questions today which come from our Instagram handle @States of Anarchy, which you should be following if you aren't already. Our first question is from Taha, who asks, is the UN just a dummy body? Thank you for your question, Taha. The United Nations or the UN has faced a lot of criticism in the recent years, but there's a lot to unpack in what it actually does. So in 2016, on the UN's 70th anniversary, Shashi Tharoor, who was the former Under-Secretary General of the United Nations, said that the call of the hour is a renewed but by no means a retired UN. What does that mean? Does the UN need a major reform to adapt to changing times? Sure. But that doesn't mean that the world could function without an intervening international body like the United Nations. An ORF report quotes Shashi Tharoor again on saying that the UN's role as a global governance mechanism is incredibly crucial. And there's lots of evidence to back this argument. The United Nations intervention in a number of global catastrophes was necessary. In the 75 years since its conception post the Second World War, the United Nations has successfully intermediated in many landmark historical events. And whether that's preventing the escalation of the Cold War or participating in peacekeeping efforts, aiding in strategic consultations, setting norms for decolonization and disarmament, and many, many things. In the changed world, post 75 years of the UN, a reformed UN is indispensable. Now, the first and foremost goal of the United Nations is to maintain international peace and security. And this was also reinforced by the United Nations Security Council and the United Nations General Assembly. The Security Council takes the lead in identifying any potential threats to peace or acts of aggression. And then it calls on parties to a dispute to settle it by peaceful means, and it recommends methods of adjustment or it recommends terms of settlement. Now, the General Assembly is the main deliberative, policy-making, representative organ of the United Nations. And the UN relies on tactics of preventative diplomacy and mediation and deploying peacekeeping forces to counter terrorism and other threats. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, formulated in 1948, possibly one of the most important mechanisms of international law, lays down rights that are inalienable to all human beings. And since then, the UN has diligently protected human rights through legal instruments and on-ground activities. Councils like the Office of High Commissioner for Human Rights and the Human Rights Council oversee any human rights violations. A big part of the United Nations responsibility is also delivering humanitarian aid, especially in war-ravaged countries. So, after the aftermath of World War II, the UN has provided humanitarian relief from emergency on multiple accounts, from helping refugees and children, feeding the hungry, healing the sick. The UN has stepped in to fill the gaps of national relief efforts. The UN Charter, in its preamble, sets an objective, quote, to establish conditions under which justice and respect for obligations arising from treaties and other sources of international law can be maintained, end quote. What this means is that the United Nations undertook the onus to ensure that all international treaties are adhered to. If there was any breach, then the case would be heard in the International Court of Justice according to international law. And international law defines the legal responsibilities of states in their conduct with each other and their treatment of individuals within state boundaries. This branch of the UN also addresses and metes out punishments for war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, and so on. So, as we can see, the UN isn't really sitting idle while states do as they please. A simple answer to your question about whether the UN is a dummy body would be no. But does that mean that the UN can do no wrong? It can't be touched on a high pedestal? Of course not. There have been enough instances where the UN's deafening silence on global issues has been frowned upon and heavily criticized. The UN isn't that different from most organizations voted into power. It dodges responsibility and accountability when something misfires. When things go right, the United Nations, like all governments, takes credit. But when things go wrong, it's the fault of the member states. Multiple people have pointed out that there's an internal credibility gap between the achievement and the objective of the United Nations. Now, the UN has made remarkable contributions, but what it hasn't done is hold developed countries accountable. Apart from fulfilling the official development assistance targets, developed countries have faced no external pressure or obligation to contribute to the further development of the whole world. And the UN also has its own power imbalances. Even though the United Nations is supposed to be impartial and not allow states to break international law, it doesn't really have mechanisms to prevent lapses. Consider interventions by the United States or the NATO into Libya, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, and many countries in the African continent or Latin America. The UN has allowed the discourse on human rights to shield geopolitical motivations. Many scholars argue that the collective security model on which the UN is based is plagued by two problems: big power dominance and selective engagement. So, unless the UN makes an active effort to reform itself to counter all of these drawbacks, its credibility will continue to suffer in the public eye and draw flack. How it will reform is anybody's guess. Our second question for the day comes from Manaswini on Instagram. She says, I would like to know how geopolitical relationships are and will be shaped by COVID responses. For example, Korea's first move was not to ban flights from other countries, but to ban flights of countries which had banned Korea. Thank you for the question, Manaswini. Ever since the Chinese government first notified the World Health Organization or the WHO of COVID-19, narratives about where it started and how it started are very polarized. And this has led to an increase in tensions between many countries. Very glaring is the case of China and the United States. Then these political tensions influence how individual countries prepare for and cooperate with each other with responding to a pandemic. Of course, each country figures out its response depending on the severity of the outbreak, its own public health system, previous passport regimes, and its economy. For example, countries like Maldives or the Seychelles, which are heavily dependent on tourism, have been quicker to open up their borders to international travelers. On the other hand, consider a country like Australia that did not relax its borders even for its own citizens, threatening them with imprisonment or fines that went up to $66,000. Now, pandemics, disasters, and other crises of a global nature don't really respect or care about national borders. In the past, countries have recognized this and they've coordinated their responses. Even if the World Health Organization this time around tried to organize a global response, most countries preferred to fight COVID-19 on their own terms. This resulted in some sort of competition because resources are scarce. Think back to the beginning of the pandemic when there weren't enough masks or PPEs or hand sanitizer, or even now when India doesn't have enough oxygen supplies. Most countries lack medical resources and the technological know how required to tackle a pandemic. And while there are many global initiatives like COVAX, which provide vaccines to the developing world, they simply aren't enough. Now, various foreign policy thinkers blame the rise of populism and the stark gap in global leadership left by the United States under Donald Trump for this disjointed response. But despite who or what is to blame, the same experts say that the missing global effort indicates that there is a fundamental shift in global geopolitics. This is because state led efforts to control the pandemic within sovereign borders have become important indicators for their success or failure. Success promises influence, while failure might result in questions over a government's legitimacy. That's why China was so intent on proving itself as a capable government. That's why all eyes have been on countries like the US, India, and Brazil, where governments have come under so much criticism for how they handle the pandemic. Now, given the current situation where the global power dynamic hangs in the balance and resources are limited, protecting one's own citizens has gained the most importance for states. This is why even a moderate Joe Biden led US government is following an America First policy when it comes to vaccinations and hesitating to waive intellectual property rights on vaccines or lift embargoes on essential raw materials. But this doesn't mean countries won't cooperate with each other. This is where geopolitical relationships become especially significant. Big powers have access to medical technologies, which developing states are in dire need of. So they offer vaccines and other medical equipment to developing nations in exchange for geopolitical gains.
Catch all the episodes of States of Anarchy on our app, website, or your favorite podcasting platforms. We hope you like what you heard. Do definitely check out our website, ivmpodcast.com, for more amazing shows. And don't forget to follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. To all those who celebrate, Team IVM sends their best wishes and regards on the occasion of Eid. Stay safe, and thank you for tuning in.
Ruckus Avenue Radio.
Come learn and experience the ABCDs of being queer with me, Shunetro.
And me, Farhad.
On our show, Gay BCD.
The two of us take you through our stories and experiences of being gay men in the city of Mumbai and have candid
and sometimes downright scandalous
conversations about sexuality, gay culture, and everything in between.
Catch new episodes of Gay BCD every Tuesday on the IVM Podcast website, app, or wherever you get all your podcasts from.
IVM.